Hi, I'm Brooklyn Brown, and I work at West Franklin Elementary for Southwestern School District in Columbus, Ohio.
Pinnacle Academy, Euclid, Ohio.
Mifflin Middle School, Columbus, Ohio.
South High School in Columbus, Ohio.
South Elementary, Southwestern City Schools.
Apex Academy in Cleveland, Ohio.
Graham Elementary and Middle School in Columbus, Ohio.
North Dayton School of Discovery in Dayton, Ohio.
Pleasant View Middle School in Columbus, Ohio.
I'm helping my students by ensuring that they are logged on, that may be via text, phone call, or email.
So my focus has been on family engagement by any means possible, reaching these families, because I know that if families are engaged, students will be engaged as well.
So building that relationship with the student is important, but it's also important to build that relationship with the families.
Right now, I think that social emotional health is very important, and that's what I'm focusing on. Working with my students with calm down strategies and even coping skills.
Well, currently I have an online girls mentor group. We meet weekly. This is for middle school girls. We discuss social issues that are currently happening, current events. We discuss how they're feeling about COVID-19, how they're feeling about not being able to attend school. We also discuss other social emotional needs that they have at this time.
Currently, I am working with their parents to connect them with rental assistance so that they can provide a roof over their children's head.
It's important to have a site coordinator in the school because the administrators do such a great job, and teachers, as it pertains to the child inside of the classroom. And it is my role and responsibility to focus on the child outside of the classroom.
As a site coordinator, we focus on the relationships with our students. We focus on building a loving community around each student.
Site coordinators are important because it just adds one more person, one more adult that's there to care for the children and their families.
Site coordinators are the bridge of hope, and we provide an opportunity to allow parents to know that there is someone is there that is going to be their voice as well as a voice for the children.
I think it's really important to have a site coordinator in school because students just need a caring adult. Sometimes students don't have the advantage of having one caring adult in their life. Sometimes parents need an extra set of hands. We're an extension of their family. We help them with social emotional needs, basic needs, academic needs. We're just there to be an extra support for the school and also the family.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this virtual style event this year for the State of Our Students, hosted by Communities in Schools of Ohio. You just saw that great video that really kind of tells you what this is all about and what this organization is all about. Several of the school site coordinators, and you can really get a feel, even on this virtual setting, of the passion that they have for their students and the work that they do every day to support schools, students, and families each and every day all around the state of Ohio. If you're not sure, or if you're not familiar, Communities in Schools is actually a national organization that has been supporting underserved students for more than 40 years across the country, which is a fantastic mission. Community in Schools of Ohio is an affiliate of the national office. It is a 501c3 nonprofit headquartered right here in Columbus, Ohio, and it serves students, again, all across the Buckeye State. And I did say 501c3 nonprofit, so yes, that means they will absolutely take your money, and we will gladly tell you how to do that a little bit later. For 14.5 million children in America that live in poverty or have challenges outside of the classroom, like the lack of adequate food, clothing, shelter, healthcare, you name it, all of that can stand in the way of success inside of the classroom, and we all know that. What's great about Communities in Schools is that they work obviously with the students, work in those schools as well, removing those barriers by building one-on-one relationships with the students and providing those integrated student supports with those at-risk students, empowering them to stay in school, encouraging them each and every step of the way to succeed in life. It's just absolutely wonderful what they do. And it goes beyond the academics, because whether it's the in-home like they're worried about, clean clothes. Something like that can hinder a student's academic performance. Obviously helping with schoolwork, but just the general emotional support that we all know is important in our lives. Think how important it is for someone in that age range, everything from 10 all the way up to 18. It's so important. And then we think about the different traumatic events that can happen in a student's life as well. And then think about just the times we live in right now, whether it's inside the home with the concerns over COVID, the things we're seeing outside of the home, national events that have happened in the past year or so. All of these things are so important to be able to connect with the student, have an emotional connection with them, and just a line of communication, always important to have. And CIS, I think, just does a great job connecting students with the resources they need to help them succeed and whatever they need. It's just a fantastic organization, and I can't wait for this discussion so we can get a better idea of where students are now and what we can do to help in whatever form we can. But enough from me. We want to get to our fantastic panelists that we have here because they're the experts. I'm just the pretty face. Our first one is that I'm going to introduce is Ray Saldana. He is the president and CEO of Communities in Schools, the national organization that, again, ensures all students are empowered and stay on a path to a brighter future. Saldana, or Ray, I'm going to call him. I can't. Just going to go that way, holds both a bachelor's and master's degree from Stanford University. And here's the cool part. He is a CIS alumnus whose journey from former student supported by CIS to now a national leader obviously is inspiring, being able to write his own success story. It's absolutely wonderful. He's a son of immigrants from Mexico, born and raised on the south side of San Antonio, which is where he is joining us from right now. The product of Title I Texas Public Schools, proud first-generation American, first in his family to graduate from college, successfully also served 4 terms on the San Antonio City Council, and at age 24 was the youngest ever council person in that city's history. So he knows what he's talking about. Did a really good job, obviously, in those 4 terms. If you're going to get 4 terms, you clearly are doing something right. And focus on the needs of helping others and meeting the needs of young people and citizens alike and working families in his community. So it's great to have Ray on the call helping us out here. Also on the call is Leanne Cornyn, Director of Children's Initiatives from the Office of Ohio Governor Mike DeWine. Leanne holds a Bachelor of Arts from Miami University. As an OU grad, I won't hold that against you. After graduating from Miami, she served as a Teach for America Corps member, teaching 8th grade science in the Crenshaw Heights neighborhood of Los Angeles. So she went well away from Ohio, earned a Juris Doctorate from The Ohio State University Moritz College of Law, began her legal career as an Assistant Attorney General within the Ohio AG's office. And then in 2015, she was named the Director of Children's Initiatives for then Ohio Attorney General Mike DeWine, and continues to serve as the Ohio Director of Children's Initiatives for now Governor DeWine. And in this role, she focuses on the maternal and child health, early childhood education, children's social and emotional development, and foster care issues. So Leanne, thank you so much for spending some time with us this morning. Also joining us, Alicia Gillison, an award-winning educator and administrator, and the Chief Engagement Officer for Columbus City Schools, which is the largest school district that we have in the state of Ohio. A native of Dayton, Ohio, has a bachelor's degree from Southern University and a master's degree from the Antioch School of McGregor. Her teaching career with Columbus City Schools has run the gamut, including being a principal, being an English teacher, starting all the way back in the year 2000. She's been the executive director of secondary schools in CCS and the chief academic officer prior to her current role of chief engagement officer. Also a commissioner for the Commission on Black Girls, which is a great organization that helps kind of study the quality of life of Black girls. She understands the power of belief, and don't we all need that right now? And continues to demonstrate her belief in the educational ecosystem, home, school, community, and how all 3 have to work together to achieve the maximum impact for all students. And then finally, last but not least, Amy Gordon, the Executive Director and CEO of Communities in schools in Ohio, a graduate of Columbus City Schools herself. She has a Bachelor's of Arts in Psychology from The Ohio State University. Is also a licensed social worker. After college, she worked in high poverty neighborhoods running an after-school program with middle school students. So this is something that's special and near to Amy's heart. Went on to work with juvenile felony offenders and their parents as a home-based counselor and program supervisor with Crittenden Family Services. Joined CIS in 1999 as the director of after-school programs, served 3 terms as a National After-School Alliance ambassador to promote the expansion of after-school programs in underserved areas at the local, state, and national level. And as a parent and nonprofit professional, she knows Ohio's challenges as well as its assets. She's worked to champion the needs now of young people and struggling families for more than 25 years. So thank you to all 4 of you for being here. We also want to take a moment and express our gratitude to the sponsors of today's event, which obviously cannot do any event these days without a great support from sponsors. Want to thank Alliance Data, Nationwide Insurance, Huntington National Bank, Squire Patton Boggs, and PNC Bank. So we will be taking questions for the panel if time permits at the end of the discussion. So put those questions in the chat. We'd love to get them, and we'll get to as many as we can after the discussion. But let's jump right into the questions. And I think the first one is an obvious one. Just what do you think is the most urgent concern with the impact of this coronavirus? Amy, we'll start with you as you've seen it from the CIS angle. What has been so tough on students you've seen?
Thank you so much, Matt. And thank you everyone for being a part of our panel, for joining us this morning. I would say that the pandemic has brought to light the many economic disparities, the lower rates of engagement among many students that are living in poverty across our state. In Ohio, approximately 1 in 4 children were already living in poverty. And for them, school was a safety net and a lifeline. Although certainly online school has changed since things from the spring. I think everybody went into the fall saying we can't do the same thing over again. We know that there are still thousands of children across Ohio who are struggling. They're not engaging in online school. They're struggling to find success. They're struggling to find hope. And I would also say that the other piece to me that's just really a grave concern is for students that were already on the edge of the equity gap before the pandemic. Many of those students have slipped into that gap. Again, I mentioned that, a lot of students at the end of last year, there were over 20% of students hadn't logged into any online classes. And still that's the case, and even more so now. And so I would just say that the pandemic has brought to light inequities that we knew existed, and has really just increased and exacerbated a lot of the challenges that so many of our students were already facing.
Alicia, working for Columbus City Schools, the urban school district, the largest that we have in the state, what have you noticed among the students with CCS? Because they haven't been able to go to school since school has started in this new school year.
Absolutely. And just following up on what Amy was saying, the exacerbation of when you think about before, we've all heard the term the achievement gap. Well, that achievement gap is exacerbated. And when you ask the question, the most urgent concerns, it goes all the way back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Those concerns, trying to make sure that those concerns are met, those basic needs, food, shelter, health, the sense of belonging and safety. When we go back and look at those quotes that we opened this session with, you hear it and you see it. And those are the things that we have to keep in mind as public servants who've been called to this work, how we can listen with our hearts and our minds so that we can be that hope for our children. And our children are resilient, but it's those, if we aren't tending to those Maslow's hierarchy of needs, then we're missing the mark. The socialization, the relationship building, helping our students with coping skills and those basic health concerns. When you're talking about inner city schools or urban schools, a lot of times, and especially in Columbus City schools, and I'm certain other urban areas find this, what the pandemic has done. Like, students are missing those basic vaccines. We may get through, eventually get through COVID, but then you think about measles, mumps, rubella. When they would come to schools and be notified that your child needed that and you had to have it in order to attend school, where is that now? And how are our health providers reaching out? One thing that we don't want to do, we don't want to leave from COVID and then go into another catastrophe for our kids. So it's about us as adults working together and really realizing where our kids are. I think the quotes that we saw at the beginning need to be played at every school, for every staff member, for every parent, for every healthcare provider, because we will get through this. But the only way we'll get through this is to realize what is actually happening with our young people.
And Ray, I'll go to you next. We know kind of the short-term effects that we're seeing on kids, whether it's a lack of socialization and maybe the remote learning, eyes on screen, but there are going to be some long-term effects of this too, 1 year, 2 year, maybe 3 years down the road. What worries you? What concerns do you have about the long-term effect this past year learning with COVID may have on students?
Matt, well, first of all, good morning to the folks who are joining us. Thank you, Matt, for facilitating the conversation. Grateful to be on with folks who are on the front lines. Alicia, Leanne, who sees it from the public sphere at a really wide scape, and Amy, who's been doing terrific work on the ground in Ohio. Grateful for this question. What does it look like to take a long view of a crisis that asks us to address the most immediate? I think Alicia is absolutely correct. What is we have to Maslow before we bloom here with many of our students. The great thing about our organization and the communities and schools is also that we've got a little gray in our hair. We've been in this game, in this work for 43 years. So I could have told you examples in this time last year about what life looked like for the 1 in 7 students across the country who were living in poverty, suffering from the effects and the barriers that hold them back. Amy just made that more real and specific. In Ohio, 1 in 4 children are suffering. And again, this was before anyone had ever heard of the coronavirus. And what we need to understand long-term with many of our students is that every generation is asked to cope with the kinds of cards that you were dealt. But this generation specifically is going to ask to cope in a way that none of us on this call have had to do. And so what that really calls for the rest of us as legislators, as policymakers, leaders in the public sector, is to recognize that the children and their families are going to be coping with pain. And sometimes when you have pain, especially if you're one of the 4 children, you find yourself finding ways to either numb that pain, or you find your way to people who are going to help you cope. And that's the mission of communities and schools. You talked about it, you outlined it. And so can we build a system so that we could catch these young people on the front end? You mentioned that I was on the city council working at the local government in San Antonio. I got really tired of being on the back end of that system. There are going to be systems, people, institutions who are going to find these children. I have no doubt about that. I would rather that be our educators, Alicia and her team at Columbus Public Schools, than to be in the back of a police vehicle, to be introduced to the kind of toxic communities that can come when you're looking for ways to numb pain in the most immediate of ways. And I say that as a leader of an organization who, again, coming into this work, we were dealing with the opioid crisis in West Virginia, and we learned about what it's like to address poverty in rural communities in rural Georgia, or in urban communities like Chicago or Houston. So we know the science, we know what works. And at the end of the day, the equation is pretty simple. Long term, unless these children find a caring adult who is taking an interest in them, not just praising them when things are going well, but more so now than ever, really addressing them when things are going bad, and then telling folks when they're coming off of coming off the track or where their potential is at risk. That's the long-term picture. We know where it's going, and we just have to find these students before others do.
Leanne, you're in a unique position where, Ohio has 88 counties and schools that range from the urban inner city to the suburban to the rural parts. And what are you seeing from kind of that view of all of that, that students are going to be, affected by this for the next 2, 3, 4 years now?
Sure. So I think Amy and Ray and Alicia are all correct. About 50% of students in Ohio are economically eligible for free or reduced price lunches. So we know that many Ohio kids are already living on the margins. And certainly this pandemic has sort of pushed them, as Amy said, into the gap. So first and foremost, we know that literacy skills are foundational to a kid's lifelong success. Some of our youngest learners have really struggled in this online environment. So certainly concerned about catching some of those kids up, but I know that we have incredible teachers out there who have evidence-based strategies to get those kids back on track. So what really concerns me the most, and I think Alicia touched on this, is the impact of the pandemic on our kids' mental and physical well-being. So our 6 freestanding children's hospitals across the state recently shared some data that shows an increase in demand for behavioral health services from 2019 to 2020. And anecdotally, they're also observing that our kids are coming there sicker. They have more physical trauma, more abuse, more neglect, and also more urgent behavioral health evaluations for things like suicidality and suicidal ideation. So we're sort of compounding that greater need for behavioral health services with a lack of physical health care. The Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services in September said that there's been an up to 68% reduction in kids who are getting preventative care. So that's things like Alicia said, like vaccines, vision screenings, dental checks, even just general well-child visits. So we know that when our kids are coming back into school, they're going to have different needs. They're going to be, maybe a little bit needier behaviorally, physically, and certainly physical and emotional well-being can impact attendance, engagement, which ultimately leads to academic success and outcomes. So certainly these are some troubling trends that I think that our school districts, but also our communities are going to have to contend with in the years to come.
The impact of the coronavirus is something we all know, because students are not in school or they're going hybrid or whatever it may be. But beyond that, there's also what's been happening in our world, what's happening right here in our country. And there has been a big social justice movement. There's been a lot of racial unrest. And at a moment where we're all stuck, sadly, inside of our homes and kind of having internalized it. And think about, I think about those students that have had to watch all of this and maybe not have anyone to talk to about it. Alicia, I'll come to you. Being here in Columbus, I've obviously seen it all, had to cover it and talk about it a lot. What are the responsibilities of educators and parents and teachers and just adults in general to make sure our students, when they see this, know how to feel and how to react to these kinds of things?
Thank you for that question, Matt. And it goes back to listening to our students, because they are definitely reacting to it. And if they don't have anyone to talk to about it, to explain exactly what's going on, because if you think about it, students are in homes, they're looking at things. And if you thought that there was an addiction to social media with our kids before the pandemic, that is their outlet now. So they're reading horrible things about different races and they're internalizing that. As an adult, we have the responsibility to helping them frame it, right? Right now, the pandemic is an equalizer. It didn't just happen to inner city youth. It didn't just happen to the suburban kids. It didn't happen to the haves and the have-nots. It has happened to everyone. And the way that we start working through the impact of racial inequities is really talking about the commonalities of humans, of all of us. And I think that is one layer that as adults, we need to do more of. If not, I don't want to think about if not. It's our responsibility to have those conversations and to put those models of excellence, and to teach empathy, and to teach that we are all on this planet, and our young people are the successors of this government. They are successors of what is yet to come, and we have to teach that. And sometimes you're going to have to put down the math book, put down the science book, and talk about what we've witnessed. I'm excited about where we are in the country. The inauguration was a beautiful ceremony with a lot of hope, and especially for our young people.
Ray, I'll go to you too here on this. I mean, Leanne mentioned the mental health of students, and we all know how important that is. And it's hard to quantify their mental health when we're not seeing them in person, as many students aren't going to school. But because of everything that has happened in the last 6-7 months in our country, and then on top of COVID, how much of a worry is that with you?
So I think about what Alicia just described, and the question that you pose really is one around what is our responsibility as educators and as adults. Couldn't double down on this question more than I think where Alicia just took us, which is that young people, children, whether online or in their own homes, have really been looking at adults as models, and we have not done the best job of displaying the kind of behavior we want to see in the next generation. And I want to just unpack what that means. So when we are pausing to talk to our young people, to those we have the closest and trusted relationship, that they might take our word as gospel, what they have just seen, it reminds me of growing up in the community I did, in the community where 90% of the community is Black or brown. Many of us don't get a lot of margin for error, where if we want to raise our voice, elevate it, and talk about justice or shifts of power, sometimes we can be batted down, and we're told what you need to do is play by the rules. You need to do is work hard, go to school, graduate, go to college. That's how you'll find success. And we don't have a lot of margin for error, for making mistakes along the way. And as an organization, we serve 83% of the students that we serve are Black or brown. And so a lot of our site coordinators are having these discussions with young people who know that when you don't play by the rules, there are consequences. And on January 6th, when layer on top everything that happened with respect to police brutality, the killing of George Floyd, and it really seems like, okay, there's this call for getting into good trouble. What can we do to truly move the momentum for racial and social justice? And then when you see folks who are breaking the rules and don't see consequences as a result of it, we're seeing some now in the way of some law enforcement, you get this mixed message for our young people. And some of our site coordinators who have talked to us, having small focus groups with students in high school, thinking about what the world is reflecting back to them, it seems to them that what they're doing is playing by two sets of rules, that if you are a certain color, if you're of a certain income, there is a different track to play. And I think we as adults have to really model that behavior now more than ever at all levels. And we all have a sphere of influence, whether it's in our home, whether we are leaders of public education systems or in public office. I think that we know the path ahead, and it is a slow march towards justice, but at the very least, the peripheral effect of that is that we have to be better models for our young people. And that means that we truly have to have honest conversations with them about what it means to live in this country now. And for us as educators, it isn't just, as Alicia described, the curriculum, the math, the science. It really is this question of our history and the impact that we have on history now.
Amy, I wonder, because the site coordinators are still working, even though we're not in schools right now, what have you heard from them about what students are asking, what students are asking them? Because maybe they have nowhere else to turn to ask these kinds of questions about what they're seeing in America.
That's a great question, Matt. And they are having those conversations. We have a mix right now because we're in different districts. We have some of our site coordinators are back in the buildings that are open. And so certainly having those conversations, having the open, honest dialogue, having the opportunity to have the dialogue also with teachers and with school administrators. And, I would say that to the point of the confusion, of the mixed messages, of, students questioning, double standards. And, for many of our students, and as Ray pointed out, that nationally, 83% of the students that we serve are Black and Brown. In Ohio, that is also the case as well. And, having site coordinators that reflect, that look like a lot of the students that we're working with, that have grown up in neighborhoods that have grappled with these things, has really lent itself to having open and honest dialogue. And that's what I was going to say as I was listening to some of the responses is, it is to me critical that we face this time head on, that we face that what kids are seeing, what kids are asking about with honesty and with the opportunity to have those open, honest conversations with a caring adult, with someone that can help guide them, someone that can walk alongside and say, you know what, that really stinks. Like, that isn't fair. Like, this isn't the way it should be. But then what do we do to make it better? What are steps we can take? What are things we can do in our schools? And so it has brought about that opportunity, which I hope we don't ever lose that. That's a commitment that we've made organizationally, just to embrace the conversations, to embrace the diversity, to embrace the honesty of our interactions with both students and with schools.
Leanne, I want to turn to the fact that we have so many students that are having to learn from home, even if it's 3 days a week or 5 days a week. And we know one of the biggest issues with that is internet access. And some parents have to leave, and then, they don't have care at the home to be able to follow, to make, to keep their kids focused on their work. And I just wonder at the state level, what can we do? What is being done, so that way we can kind of make that gap a little smaller in terms of the access to the things they need to be able to succeed.
Sure. So certainly access to broadband and internet connectivity has been a huge priority of Lieutenant Governor Husted's. Earlier at the beginning of this academic year, we were able to launch a $50 million grant program to help schools purchase technology that supported learning for kids who are remote or hybrid. And I also want to applaud the innovation and ingenuity of school districts across the state. Alicia and her team are building out a series of community providers who are giving kids safe spaces to come and to learn and to connect to Wi-Fi and do their homework and get a warm meal. So I think that there is, certainly a lot of need out there, a lot of demand out there, through partnerships with many of our rural and Appalachian communities, through Jobs Ohio and the Lieutenant Governor's Office of Broadband Ohio. We've been able to spring up additional access and connectivity in communities where they previously didn't have it. But there's just a lot of really great innovation at the local level too, to ensure that we are caring for these kids at a moment in time where they need it most.
We saw those quotes at the beginning of the slideshow there, and they're somewhat heartbreaking when you start to know that those are real people that are saying those things. 6th graders, 7th graders saying, I sleep so I don't have to think about it, whether it's COVID or what's happening in the world. Saying I start to cry and I don't know why, or just this virtual learning is hurting my grades because I just can't focus on the screen compared to being in a classroom and wanting to be there, but knowing it's not safe. Alicia, when you think about your Columbus City school students all over this city, and they're struggling, how do you respond? What do you want to say to them? Because they'd rather be in school with their friends and with their teachers learning instead.
Absolutely, Matt. And Leanne kind of touched on it a bit. What we have done in Columbus and working with our amazing partners and our district partners, community partners, our faith-based partners, everyone rose up. We have over 100 learning extension centers, which are safe places for our young people to come. Since you can't go to the school building, you can come to a learning extension center with Wi-Fi connection, have a little socialization, of course, socially distanced with your PPE. You can see other students. You're in a safe environment, a caring environment. And we have these centers all over the city. And they're not just for Columbus City Schools kids. They're for any student that needs that type of support. whether you're stuck in the house and you've got 4 siblings and everybody is trying to get on the internet at the same time, or you can't focus because of what's happening in the house, you can come to a learning extension center to help support you socio-emotionally, academically. We have communities in schools, one of our great partners, where they actually have site coordinators that are working with students. And we've talked a lot about students, and I don't want us to miss the fact that we have to work with families. We've got to work with families as well, because that's the first point of contact. And we started in Columbus City Schools. It's called We Care Wednesdays. And it's one Wednesday a month. And we get volunteers from the community, internal, external, and we make phone calls, not robocalls, not putting it on the internet, phone calls to say, hey, Matt, I'm calling from Columbus City Schools. How are you doing? Is there anything you need? We partnered with Lutheran Social Services that had information like rental assistance, utility assistance. So if Matt says, I don't know how I'm going to pay my rent next month, we gave you the information. But it's that human touch and reaching out, because when families are okay, that helps support our students. So what we have to do, the Columbus community, I'm so proud and honored to be a part of it. They rose up. And these learning extension centers, they're in churches, they're in the parks and recreation centers, they're in community centers, they're in every neighborhood. And our CODA, our bus transportation system, the city transportation system, has laid their routes on top of the learning extension centers so students can get to and from. This is a community effort, and the only way we're going to get through this is to get through this together.
Amy, I always love the community and schools model because of the site coordinators, especially because you get to be inside the school and then you get to know the family. I just have to think how much more important is it to already have that model in place that you guys already do in community and schools in Ohio, when then this pandemic hit. And you guys were ready and raring to go because you already knew these students, you knew their families, and you could help their many needs that come with what this pandemic has brought about.
Thanks, Matt. It definitely, it was funny because people heard communities and schools, and pretty quickly when the buildings closed, people said, what are you going to do? You're not in the school anymore. And I mean, our staff were amazing. Our site coordinators, our program managers, they shifted immediately. They came up with a plan of doing outreach, making phone calls, texting, using social media, figuring out any way they could to connect with students, with families. But we also were in the community, and that's the piece too, because the need for families to still access food, for, the Columbus City Schools ran several sites that they had resource tables. We manned some resource tables. One of our other partners, Southwestern City Schools, did an amazing food distribution. Our site coordinators ran those food distribution sites. And so because they had the relationship both with the school, with the principal, with the staff, they could say, what are the most pressing needs? How can we jump in? And then for the students and families, they had the connection points to say, how can you get to a food site? We had one family that had, 2 younger kids. We work in elementary, middle, and high schools. They had 2 younger children. Mom was an essential worker. They were home from school, but she wasn't. She was a single mom who was working, the shifts where all the food pickup sites, that was the only time they were open. And so our team came together, created a plan, and had people who were regularly picking up and dropping off food to this house through the whole duration of the time that mom was trying to figure out, how am I going to get my kids fed? I mean, at the end of the day, the mission of communities and schools is to surround students with a community of support, empowering them to stay in school and achieve in life. And we know that when students don't have academic success, they don't graduate, statistically, their odds of either ending up in jail, ending up with an addiction, ending up without a meaningful job of gainful employment, those issues are much higher. And so we as an organization have to figure out, how do we stand in the gap for these kids? how do we come alongside them and their families? We had families who, there was food available, but didn't have a refrigerator. Our site coordinator connected with a community resource, got a refrigerator into the home. So you're right, Matt. We are communities in schools, but we are really, our site coordinators are the ones that are standing to meet those needs and connect in that gap, but in relationship with other partners. We don't do it alone. We're not going in and rewriting the playbook. We're saying amazing partners exist, amazing resources exist, but how do we connect it? The last thing I'll say with that is that I have said throughout this that if you have a family and you deliver a box with $1 million in it, but they do not have the means, the resource, the awareness to open that box and access that resource, it does them no good. Communities and schools comes alongside, our site coordinators, our partners come alongside and say, not only here is the box, but here's how you open that box, here's how you utilize the resource that's in it, and here's how you find success with that.
You talk about the great partners, and there are so many great community partners, but of course we also always will need the support of county, city, and state governments as well. And Leanne, as our resident member of state government right now, I just wonder, what role do legislators have in this fight to reopen schools, make sure our students are being fed, being taught, and that achievement gap that we're worried about, bringing that closer together?
Sure. Well, we have been very fortunate to have a great partnership with our members in the General Assembly to deploy hundreds of millions of dollars to support, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs for our kids and families. We've been able to push out almost $70 million in housing and rental assistance, more than $1 billion in additional nutrition benefits, which includes more than $300 million in direct support for kids who have been learning remotely and have missed their free or reduced price meals. Certainly there's more to be done, and we have a budget that's coming up very soon. In fact, the governor will present his as introduced budget to the General Assembly on Monday. And I think that this is an incredible opportunity for us as a state to reaffirm our priority and our investments in Ohio's future, and that's our kids. So we look forward to partnering with them and working with them. I know sometimes, investing in programs and in strategies where there's not an immediate sort of tangible return on investment can kind of feel like a gamble. But I think now is a really incredible and critical time to ensure that we're investing in our kids and in our future.
And Ray, you've been in city government before. You know how this works. How important is it to invest in our kids, especially right now, as we can see them struggling so much with all the effects of the coronavirus?
Thank you for that question. It asks us to really look in a way that, if you're a legislator and you are thinking about the reason for the reason that I got into this business was to help as many people as possible. And when you consider what it looks like to have population level change, you really have to ask yourself, as Leanne described, what are those institutions, what are those programs that are having the highest return on investment? And I will just say this, I want to pull back a little bit and say something that our founder knew from the beginning in the late 70s when he described the work that we were doing. It's not programs that are changing students' lives, it's relationships. And it just happens to be that the way that we allow adults to collide with students in a purposeful way for a positive impact is through finding them in schools. And so as a legislator, as I'm thinking about, I think that the idea for us at communities and schools is pretty simple. It is, how can we get a site coordinator in every Title I school across Ohio? And that takes a level of investment, that takes a level of support from the private sector who pilots the original schools in the new county, and thinking through what would that look like, how long would that take, and then saying, okay, now I have to take the lens off of thinking through just my next election cycle, because I certainly know what it's like to be a legislator and wanting to be able to point to this construction, this infrastructure. Here's what we did. But having the sort of boldness to think about a long-term strategy that has an impact on this generation is going to be something that you want to make a smart bet on as a legislator. And I want to continue to demystify communities in schools. When I found communities in schools as a high school student in San Antonio, I didn't know I was finding a national nonprofit. I didn't know I was finding communities in schools. I was just building a relationship with Ms. Reyes. And Ms. Reyes, to use Amy's analogy, was helping me unbox this concept called college that nobody in my family had ever known about, that nobody in my neighborhood explained. This is how the process works. It's how we create those relationships between young people, and for us, there's a science behind it. There's evidence. There's decades worth of evaluation of our work. But at core, it's as a legislator, how can I invest in creating the appropriate connection points between young people and adults so they can learn how to unlock the potentials. And as a first generation American, having seen my father become a citizen, there is a promise we have in Ohio, that we have in Texas, that we have across the country around the American dream. We just happen to be at a time in our history where that's being challenged the most. So I would, as a legislator, be thinking big, thinking about this decade.
We've heard you all say some of the sobering statistics in Ohio and our nation about children and what prevents them from having success. But as we get near a close here, I wonder what gives you hope. What are some of those statistics? And we'll start with you, Amy, that remind us all that having those site coordinators, having those adults in our lives, those mentors in our life, that lead us to, as Ray said, to college, to academic success, to whatever it may be, something, some of those hopeful signs that you see that are happening now or will happen that make you think we're going to be okay.
Thank you, Matt. To me, it goes back to the relationships. And I know that has been stated, and I think sometimes it's maybe underrated, the significance of that. But, again, looking statistically, when you look at points of impact and points of change in someone's life, what you often hear is them attributing that to a caring adult, to someone who stepped in, to a teacher, to, whether it's a site coordinator, whether it's, someone through a faith-based, but that caring adult who can be focused on that student is critical. And I should say focused on that student's, just their overall needs, because we know that our teachers are caring adults. We know that our school staff, we know that our principals are, we know that our community is, but if a student doesn't have someone to come alongside and draw them out, or draw out what the needs are, or find out that, the reason they're not coming to school is because, mom can't afford to get the clothes clean and she's too embarrassed, then that's a break in that opportunity for that young person. And, I often look back, my mom was raised in extreme poverty, and in foster cares and in foster care and in orphanages. And I look back often at stories that she has shared with me from her youth, and how she beat every statistic that would be in place for someone who grew up in poverty or who grew up in an abusive situation. And the impact of relationships, the impact of the intersection of someone coming in and help meeting both physical and social, emotional, mental health needs was a life changer for her. And to me, that speaks to how do we address generational poverty? How do we address generational issues? Because of that intersection in her life, then that has carried on. And that's where I think the hope is. The hope is the relationship that our school site coordinators have, that our community has with kids, the opportunities that we have as an organization to break into a child's life and help meet physical needs, and also address the whole child and their needs.
Alicia, I'll go to you next. So what gives you hope? I know our children in this country and in Ohio and Columbus are resilient, and we've seen that. Is that part of what gives you hope as well?
That is exactly what gives me hope. And if I could just leave everyone with this, we hear public school systems, and in our minds, a lot of times we think it's the public school system. I hope I can articulate this right. Please see it as the public's school system, which means it's going to take all of us leaning in and supporting our kids. internal staff, community partners like communities and schools, and a plethora of other partners are doing wonderful job. But everyone, in the sound of my voice, a public school system means that's a system of the public. It's ours. It's all of ours. And there was a question in the chat, what can we do? Get involved. It's not its own entity over here by itself, and that's the school's responsibility. It's our responsibility as US citizens, because we're a part of the public and we're a part of the public school systems.
Leanne, I'm sure you echo that from where you sit. Every day you're seeing public-private partnerships that are helping students. And I just want, from where you stand, what gives you hope about us getting out of this pandemic and seeing our students thrive?
Absolutely. Well, I think the local innovation that's happening here in Columbus certainly has been on display during this conversation. We've been very fortunate to provide our school districts and our communities with something called Student Wellness and Success Funding, which really encourages and requires community partnerships so that we're supporting our kids, not just from the school district, but with community behavioral health, engaging families, supporting kids' physical and physical wellness. So I think Alicia is right. It requires the entire community to wrap around our kids so that they can be healthy and successful. And I think it's just an incredible opportunity for our communities to reaffirm those partnerships that are essential to our kids' long-term health and success.
And Ray, I'll let you close it with this. Overcoming adversity is nothing new in your life. It's nothing new to many of the students that Community and Schools provides for and works with. Is that also a part of what gives you hope? Is you've seen so many examples of students and families overcoming so much that this is just another thing that we're all going to work together to make sure they can do that?
Matt, I'm glad that you start there, because it's sort of, for me, it starts individually, personally, on this mission of having known so many families, so many friends, so many folks with incredible potential. And I feel like one of the lucky ones. And it really shouldn't be that if we are living in a country that calls itself a prosperous America with a dream, then it shouldn't just be the lucky ones who get access to this. But I think what gives me hope is actually something that Leanne said earlier in the program, which is a hope for the kind of recognition across leadership that we can't turn away from this issue. Leanne said that 51% of the students in Ohio schools are now students who qualify for free or reduced lunch, who we know are suffering from the effects of poverty. I used to believe that was just folks like myself or Amy or Alicia who live and breathe this work, and we had to really convince policymakers, those in positions of power, that this is a problem you cannot look away from. I don't feel as if now we are in a place where we have to explain to folks the issues of equity. I heard an inaugural address that talked about equity, and we're hearing from all levels of power at local, state, and federal level that this is something we can no longer turn away from. And so I hope what that does for us, and what gives me hope, is that we're talking about building a system that's better. And the question for us, to tie it back to this one of racial justice and those who have power and those who don't, is that will we do what we have in the past, which is ignore those voices that can be easily ignored, where there is no consequences because perhaps they don't go to vote at highest numbers. But if we truly care about this issue, what I'm grateful to hear is that leaders all across the country are talking about equity, talking about making investments in our public schools that look different, the ingredients, and there's plenty of work to go around. And it's not just a job of communities and schools. We hope that all of the partners are coming together on this important issue.
All right, I think we have time for maybe one or two questions. So I'm going to turn to Pam, who is behind the screen, if she has a question that we would like to throw out to one of our panelists.
I do, thank you. First question up, how can we best connect to the kids, and how can we make sure that the kids are getting the help they need?
Alicia, you want to take that one?
Absolutely. And I'm not quite sure who we are, but I'm telling you, one of the first places to start is to work with the school district, work with any of the community partners, so you can hear directly from students and directly from families on what they need. The We Care Wednesday, we were actually making phone calls to homes. You know, we didn't want to guess what a family needed. We wanted to hear exactly from that family. So then we turned to communities and schools and some of our other partners to align those resources and supports. I think the best way to do it is to work with a school district or an amazing partner like we have, Communities and Schools.
Next
Thank
question.
you. All right, next up. Knowing most of our support is being focused on the right now need, are there thoughts and plans on how to support the long-term impact of this time?
Go for it, Ray.
Yeah, maybe I can jump in. I've talked about the science of what we do with students. And what I really mean by that is that there is a lot of research around the long-term trauma-informed care that adults are being trained on to really support young people. So that's a great question, because I will give you some of the early examples. Throughout the country, there have been leading experts in the world of social emotional academic learning, trauma-informed care. Now their expertise is finding its way not just in academic papers of higher education, but we're turning them into tools that are being used by site coordinators at communities and schools, by social workers, by counselors who are being deployed in public school systems. And I say that because oftentimes what is this question we talked about, not just the whole child, but the whole family, we set up a survey questions of one of these tools where it should take about 10 minutes of a survey with a family to talk about their needs and their concerns, long-term issues. That ends up being an hour and 45-minute conversation with an adult who's just looking for help and looking for somebody to trust. And the prompting of these questions around really what's happening in their community, that's the hard work of this. Do we have adults and an army of folks lined up with the science behind them to truly help families and the students that are in front of them? That's the trauma-informed care, social emotional learning. When we talk about that, there is specific tools that we can use, because that's going to be the long-term effect of the world that we're living in right now.
And Matt, if I could just add, I think that's really great. And Ray, I thank you so much for bringing that up. As he mentioned at the beginning of this, many of our kids in our communities were already struggling with some of these challenges even before the COVID-19 pandemic began because of the opioid epidemic. So we've been successfully able to invest in many of these strategies that work at the local level and promote local partnerships and ingenuity and investment in evidence-based practices that are already underway. So I think in many regards, we can keep the investments and the efforts that we already have in our communities going and double down on them to really support our kids now and in the long term.
All right, it's 10 o'clock and we're on time people here. But I do want to really quickly go to Amy. Amy, I do want you to just, if you are an organization or business and you want to get involved, what is the best way they can get involved in community and schools for us?
Sure. The best way is to reach out. On your screen is our website. There's a link in there. You can send an email through that and sign up for our newsletter, text to give, also to reach out. You're welcome to call our office, Communities and Schools of Ohio, directly. Our success is because of our relationships with our partners, with people that we collaborate with now all over the state. And so please do feel free to reach out. You're welcome to email me directly. I believe we can put my email in the chat, but if not, you can reach out to me through our website.
Thank you so much. And I hope everyone not only understood just the importance of supporting our students and our families out there, but the especially wonderful mission of Communities and Schools and what they do, because despite the pandemic, their work never stopped. In fact, like I said, I think the infrastructure was already in place for them to be able to succeed that much more. And that is what makes this organization so great. So thank you once again to Alicia, Amy, Ray, Leanne for being our experts in this call. Our sponsors, Alliance Data, Nationwide Insurance, Huntington National Bank, Squire, Patton Boggs, and PNC Bank. And again, if you want to get involved, the information is right there on your screen. Thank you all so much. Let's not forget about our students as we finish out this school year. I know vaccines are on the way and schools are slowly opening back up, but it's going to take much more than a vaccine for us to repair everything that may have gone wrong in our students' lives and families' lives over the last 9 months or so. So let's continue to think about them, support them, and thank you once again for taking part in this virtual event. Have a great day.
Thank you.